Okay, so in this video we're going to be looking at one of the roles for Client Brief 5, and it's kind of the role that starts everything off, and so it's probably the most important one. Make sure that you assign this to somebody reasonably responsible, maybe the team leader, so that they can overlook everything and keep hold of some of the project files. So I'm going to explain the reason why the animator is considered probably the most integral role. And that's because they produce the shape of the coaster. Okay, now you would normally think that that's down to the 3D modeler, but actually we use 2D shapes to start building this. So I'm going to demonstrate this in 3ds. Again, you can use any software package for this, and there's probably a few different tools in those packages to maybe help with this, but generally speaking, the approaches that I'm going to demonstrate you can use in any different application. So one of the first things that I want to do is set up my file, and I want to make sure that I'm using an appropriate size. So I don't want to accidentally make the size of our roller coaster in millimeters. If my 3D modeler is then working in meters, we're going to have to scale everything down, and it's kind of just going to cause problems. So I'm going to come to customize and unit setup, and here I want to make sure that I'm on kind of something sensible. It doesn't really matter which one you pick, whether you want Imperial or whatever, or US standard, or make your own. But just for the sake of kind of common sense, I'm going to work in meters. A roller coaster might be a couple of 100 meters in track length, so it kind of makes sense. Going for centimeters would just make the maths unnecessarily complicated if and when we get there. So I'm just going to set this to that. You might want to save the project folder, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, and I'm actually going to make a 2D object. So here we have kind of create. And up here, what we have is, so we have creation tools, we have 3D generally, unless we go in here, and then we have splines, which are quite often two-dimensional. Now, one of the things we have to be a little conscious of is when we draw a 2D shape into a 3D world, we want to use one of the viewports that's restricted to 2 dimensions. So by that, what I mean is this perspective view. It's a 3D viewer of our world. We can see at most of the time both all of X, Y, and Z. Whereas here, even though we can see the effects of all 3 axes, we generally only actually edit 2 per one. Okay, so maybe either the X and the Z, or the Z and the Y. And in particular for this one, I'm going to use the top down. And the reason for that is that if I were to make a shape on the top down, and it's a 2D shape, as I make it, it automatically gets assigned to the 0 height. So 0 degrees on the Z axis. And that makes it just kind of a lot easier, to position. So I'm just going to undo that. For your and you can Alt W, you can maximize this if you want, and you can sort of work in this for a while. That might be a little bit easier actually. So we're just going to scroll out. And for your roller coaster, you would probably use line. So what this tool does is you just left click. You don't need to drag it, and you can sort of start to make maybe a roller coaster, and you can see that if I do kind of close together clicks, I can start to get some kind of smoother angles. But for this demo, what I'm actually, and once we go round to the end, if we click on the end, it will ask you if you want to close that, and we now have this shape. And we can kind of get an idea of the kind of the overall size of the shape, and you know, it's okay. There are definitely some issues, like here. That's going to cause a lot of complaints. So you might want to then go in here and actually, you know, kind of play around with some of the points and move them around and try to maybe add some points. You know, play around with the Bezier controls on them to smooth them out and things like that. So that's very much an initial job for the animator to work on to get that track feel. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that because I'm just going to show you a reduced kind of example. So I'm actually just going to use a circle for this, just to kind of show you how it works, really. You can use a circle if you want, but you will need to edit it. You know, you'll need to kind of play around with this quite a bit before we do that. Now, once you have your line shape or your track for the roller coaster, one thing you will certainly want to do is have a look at this and make sure that you have you know, points that go up and down. So most roller coasters aren't just flat, they actually have kind of peaks and troughs in them, and we want to be able to play around with that, you know, and we need to have that done before we hand this off to the animator. So make sure that to the 3D modeler. So make sure that you're comfortable with the size and the shape of your track, the vertical positioning of it, and then once you've done that, make sure that you don't edit it any further, otherwise it's going to cause a few issues for you know, the other members of your team. Now obviously, much like a 3D shape, if we want to edit the topology of something like a circle, we need to convert it to an editable kind of object, and in this case, because it's a spline, it's not a poly because it's not three-dimensional, we just change it to convert to editable spline. And that will over here add in the selection tools for playing around with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this, we can select the vertexes, so the individual points in this circle, we can select the separate lines in it, or the whole path. Okay, so for now, just to demonstrate this, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to move this upwards. So now what you can see is that this shape kind of has an up and a down bit that we can play around with just a little bit. So once we've done, as I said, all of the modifications, you want to save your scene file and you want to distribute that to everybody else. So and this is the file that we will start with for all of the other videos and all of the other roles. So I'm just going to quickly pause this and then get on with the rest of the animator task. Okay, so now that that's saved, what we have here is we have obviously our basic line, and you may be wondering what on earth you're meant to be doing with that in terms of animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this as a path for animating objects. So we want an object that will follow this path. Okay, now what you may be thinking is, well, that's great, but my 3D modeler hasn't given me an object yet, so how am I meant to work on this before I do? And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to come over to here and we're going to add in something that's going to help us. So we're going to go over to where is it gone? In helpers, and we're going to go down to dummy. So dummies are non-renderable objects, and they're really helpful for this kind of situation where we're wanting to work on something separate from our 3D modeler, but we don't want to sit around and wait. So I've created a little dummy here. It doesn't render, which is great. It kind of saves a lot of time. And we're going to assign this to our path. Now, once we do that, what happens is the application will take the length of your timeline, which is at the bottom here, and it will divide it by the percentage and length of your line. So if, for example, we have 100 frames, as we do here, it will divide the length of the line by 100 and then move the dummy along that amount for each frame that passes. So before we actually assign it to the line, we want to think about how many frames we actually want in our animation and edit that. So we'll come down here and we'll come down to time configuration, which is just at the bottom here. And you'll notice that under animation, we have a start time, we have an end time, and we have a length. So if we think that standard animation is usually around 24 to 30 frames per second, so each one of these is a frame. So here we actually only really have between 3 and 4 seconds of animation, which isn't really great for us. We're meant to be doing, about 30 seconds or up to 30 seconds. So let's go ahead and change this to something like 2000 maybe. Feel free to work out the exact number that you want, and then we'll go to OK. So you notice immediately that down here we have a heck of a lot more frames, but at the moment that doesn't actually change anything, obviously, because we've not assigned anything. So what we'll do is we'll take our dummy that I've got selected, and we'll go up to animation and to constraints, and we'll go to path constraint. And we use a path constraint because we have a line that's acting as our path, and we want to constrain the object onto that path, so it can only move on the path. Once we click on that, our mouse is, so I'm not holding anything at the moment, and it's going to get this ant line from our object. And once we go over our line, you're going to see that it highlights, and then you just left click once on it. So what will happen is you'll notice that the dummy will move to what it considers to be the start position of that line. And then if we were to go down here and play, you'll see that it moves around this line in a linear fashion. Okay, we have a keyframe at the beginning, this black dot here, and a keyframe here, this black dot here, to represent the beginning and the end of our animation. Now this is okay, this is an okay start, but generally speaking, what we really want to do is create a variation in speed. Okay, so the roller coaster won't move in a linear fashion the whole way through. So I'm just going to stop that, go back to it, and I'm going to take this keyframe here and I'm going to delete it. So now nothing's going to happen because we haven't got any end keyframe. No, it's not moving anywhere. But we're keeping the beginning one because we want it to start there. That's okay. So one of the things we might do is actually look at this and think, well, I want some kind of acceleration to go in here. So I want this to move along a percentage slowly and then slowly build up speed. To do that, we click on our dummy and we go over to here, which is the motion tab. Okay, and this is where we edit our animation. Now if you go down here, we can see that we've got our path on here, and we can see that our current position is 0%. So we're 0% along the path. So that's the beginning. That's the beginning of the path. And you'll notice that there's a red box here. So if we were to change this, you can see on this one, for example, that we're actually moving now around here, and we can actually exceed 100%, or we can go backwards. I'm just going to right click on them, put it back at the beginning. So If it's got a red box around it, it kind of generally means that we can animate it. It's keyframeable. And that means that when we go down here and we click Auto Key, we can carry out a process of moving along our timeline, updating the position. And you'll notice that because if we're using Auto Keyframe, it will automatically record any changes to this shape. But just before I do that, I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to click Follow. And what that will do is it will actually get the dummy to face the line a bit better as it moves along it. Kind of more in a natural fashion. We want that to look kind of normal. Normally we steer into corners and things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click Auto Key. You'll notice that things go very red. That's kind of just letting you know that that's recording. I'm maybe going to do 50 frames ish, and I'm going to come along here and I'm just going to put it 5% along, and then I'm going to do another 50, but because I want it to speed up, I'm not going to do 5%, I'm going to do 10%. So we've now moved twice as far along the track in the same time. So that would suggest that we kind of do that bit a bit quicker. And what you need to do is you just kind of keep doing this. So maybe now 150. So I'm now at 10%. I did 5% last time, so I'm going to do 15. So I've accelerated kind of a bit more. And just start doing this, and that really is kind of the key aspect of the animator. And maybe once you start getting all the way around here, so let's just put that to about there. So again, we've got a keyframe in there, and then here we're moving uphill. So maybe we want to start slowing this down a little bit and start thinking about, okay, well maybe I want to, in this 50, I only want to move, let's say 6, so that'll be to 40%. And then at this point, I want to only move 4, which would be 44%. And then here, so you can see that I'm just 48% until we get up to the apex, as we've just done here. And then maybe we want to start speeding up a little bit. Around here. So what we want to kind of try and produce is a deceleration along here, and then maybe start to move into an acceleration. So here maybe I want to do another 5, and then in 5 here move up to 10, so that'll be 67%. And hopefully that means that what we get is we get this kind of deceleration and then acceleration throughout. So just keep doing that. Have a look at the way in which a line works. Remember to take off Auto Key when you're adding things. So that's basically how you do that. That's how you complete the animator role. One or two more things that you might want to do is you might want to come up here and think about adding in a camera. So if you were to add like a free camera on top of here, that would hopefully not be pointing in that direction. So that way, and then make sure that that's pointing in the way that that goes. That's fine. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to change this to the camera perspective, which isn't going to be great at the moment, obviously, because there's not really much in the scene. But I just want to kind of move it so that we can, there we go, we can start to see where the box is. There we go, maybe something like that. And then what I'm going to do is I want this to follow this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the camera a child of the dummy. So I'm just going to click on that. I'm going to come up here to link, and I'm going to click on this and hold the left mouse button. Then I'm going to let go of that. Then hopefully what will happen if we just go up here and click play, the camera will now follow the dummy, and you know, it's kind of, that gives us our POV view. You can do the same with lights, and once we get our mesh from the modeler, we can link that as well using this tool, so that it moves along with it as well. And that's really kind of the majority of the animator's role. Obviously, you know, feel free to work on it a bit more, but that's kind of the basics. So if you've done that, you've done well.